Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for listening and for tuning in again. I think this is episode 7, maybe? I don't know. It's been a long time. I actually had to, well, it seems like it's been a long time. It's really only been a little over a week, but I actually had to go back and reread a little bit of the story just to even remember what in the world I was even talking about and what the episodes were about. So I think I'm going to have these episodes be a little bit shorter, kind of like the last one was. Maybe around the 30-minute mark. I don't think this computer can take much more of what I put it through, pretty much. That's why sometimes these episodes will be a little skippy, because this thing is ancient, and hopefully within the next month I'll be putting a new one together, so I can do long ones after that. But anyways, thank you guys for listening, and let's go ahead and get into the story. Jenna Hastings was a sophomore at Stonebrook, and she went missing the day before Christmas Eve. The last time anyone had seen her, she was leaving the mall, bags of last-minute Christmas gifts in her hands, and walking across the parking lot towards the fast food place on the corner. We were already out for the holiday break at the time, so it wasn't until a few days after Christmas that it became a big enough deal that the news trickled down to us. I remember us all sitting in my attic, playing Sorry because we were tired of being outside in the cold. Cassidy had just gotten there and was telling us about Jenna, and at first it was mildly troubling and interesting, but that was all. Jenna was 3 years older than us, which at 12 might as well have been 30 years, and while we had some vague idea of who she was, we didn't have a clear idea of her as a person. Instead, she was just more of a point of interest or a cautionary tale. But then, Thomas decided to make a joke out of it. Cassidy had finished her short recounting of what she had overheard from her mother's phone conversation, and we were about to get back to the game when Thomas piped up with,
"Maybe the professor got her."
We all froze and looked at him. His proud grin started to fall away, and Mills punching him in the arm finished the job.
"Idiot,"
she said with a scowl.
"That's not funny, and it's dumb. The professor is made up."
We were all nodding our agreement, and even at the time I knew something felt wrong. We were all either 12 or 13, and none of us were known for being overly sensitive or afraid of dark humor. But we all shared a kind of desperate intensity in that moment, a need to not only rebuke what Thomas had said, but to deny it. I've thought about us sitting in that attic, scolding him while he grew sad and sullen. He didn't like being yelled at, but he didn't fight back like he usually would. It was as if he knew as much as the rest of us that he had made a mistake beyond bad taste. I think that's one of the first times I knew that we had somehow started to believe in the professor too. The following week we were back in school, and we had carefully avoided any further mention of the professor among ourselves during break, maybe in some unconscious attempt to kill the idea before it took a deeper root. But our hopes that the rest of the school would have forgotten about our stories over the holidays were dashed as soon as we got off the bus that first morning back. Two of the school janitors had just set up a pressure washer to blast paint off of the concrete walkway just a few feet from the bus lot. They had already started spraying, but we could still see the neon green words emblazoned across the ground like a brand.
"The professor took her. Who's next?"
We found out later that the vandalism had just been discovered a half hour before the buses started arriving, and that it had been removed by that afternoon, but the damage had already been done. The school was on fire with fear and speculation now. The larger world had started to take notice too. During a class change, we saw two policemen out at the walkway taking photographs of the now partially obliterated message. Then after lunch, we realized that they were still there, questioning several staff about it as well. The reason was obvious to everyone. They thought it could be connected to Jenna's disappearance, or at the very least, they wanted to cover every base just to be safe. Either way, this investigation just further validated the professor's existence to most of the students. Within the week, we were all hearing news stories about the school and the professor pop up, sometimes told to us by the same people that we had initially told the original stories to. For the first few days back, we tried to laugh it off or ignore it, and we didn't talk much about it among ourselves. But there was a tightening cord of tension running through us all. It was quickly becoming something that we couldn't just not discuss, but something we actively avoided discussing. Then a couple things happened that changed everything. The first was that the third week of January, Jenna Hastings was found. She had run off with a boy from the next town over that she had secretly been dating for over a year. He was an older boy who had made promises of taking her away from the drudgery of high school life and bossy parents, and who wound up leaving her at a burger joint 2 states away, not dissimilar from the local one he had picked her up from the day before Christmas Eve. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief, and no one was more happy that she had been found than us. We began joking about how stupid people were to believe in the professor, how silly it was. We would sit in our underground hideaway, sounding superior and proud of how everyone had just come to believe in something that we had made up. But the jokes and the laughter weren't quite the same as they had been before. Now they felt like we were whistling as we walked through a graveyard, our forced humor and bravado meant to keep dark things at bay. In the next couple of months, talk of the professor did die down from its fever pitch after the graffiti, but it never really went away. And by the last week of school that year, we had come to accept that, for good or ill, we had created a new legend for the school and the town. I say the town because there was actually a newspaper article about the professor about 2 weeks after Jenna Hastings was found. It was a puff piece in the local paper, and it was trying to trade on the drama of the missing girl who had been found while not explicably saying her name. But it was undeniably about the teacher ghost that locals had started talking about in recent months and gave poor summaries of a couple of the stories. A few of our parents asked us if we had heard anything about this ghost crap at school, and we all denied it earnestly. We were ready to put it behind us. Then Ellie Marks, or as she was frequently called by her crew fellow freshmen, Ellie Skid Marks, made the mistake of picking on Cassidy at school. Ellie was a heavy-set, unfortunately proportioned girl, and that combined with a dim intellect and terrible temper led her to frequently shift between pitiable victim and merciless bully depending on her surroundings. Likely from the outside, it was like watching some kind of social casualty experiment play out. She would get picked on, she would become hurt and angry, and she would take it out on younger, smaller students. Our group rarely had much problem with bullying, in part because we stuck together and kept to ourselves, and in part because Thomas and Mills would happily beat ass if someone tried to test things. Ellie had tried to test things a couple times in the past when Cassidy was alone. Cassidy, who was small and beautiful and delicate, who had boys already noticing her despite her best efforts to fade into the background. I think we all knew that Ellie had dealt with a harsher hand in life than Cassidy had, and that's part of why she'd never gotten worse than a strong warning from Mills whenever she had tried saying mean things to Cassidy in the past. But the last week at school, the PE classes were all devoted to some combination of field relays and dodgeball, and Ellie just couldn't resist. Myself, Mills, and Cassidy were all in the same dodgeball game that day, and we were on the second round. Dodgeball always runs the risk of turning into a brutal free-for-all, but the teacher, Miss Perkins, did a good job of keeping her PE class in line. No one had gotten hurt, and everyone was having a pretty good time so far. When Ellie got the ball in that second round, she headed straight for Cassidy. Based on the rules, she wasn't supposed to go over her team's half of the basketball court to make her throw. And the first throw, she didn't. The rubber ball thudded into Cassidy's lower back, startling her more than hurting, I think, but it was enough to get her off balance and send her to the floor. It was like seeing a falling gazelle for Ellie. She scooped up another ball as she charged towards Cassidy, waiting until she was standing over her before throwing it hard at her upturned face. Cassidy let out a yell, and Miss Perkins began running over, blowing her whistle and hollering at Ellie to get back. The older girl started mumbling some half-hearted excuse that it was an accident, but the smirk on her face said that she knew that she'd gotten caught and didn't care. Me and Mills rushed over to Cassidy, who was sitting up and had a large red welt starting to rise on the left side of her face, and her eye kept pouring water. When she saw the two of us, she started crying. I bent down and hugged her. Behind me, I could hear Mills talking to Ellie.
You just fucked up, Skidmark. We're gonna get you for this.
Normally, Miss Perkins would have jumped Mills for language and a threat like that, but I think she half wanted to hit Ellie herself. So she just told Ellie to go to the principal's office immediately and that she would be coming along in just a minute. She then turned back to Cassidy, who I had helped to her feet. Perkins was asking if she was okay or if she needed to go to the nurse when we started to hear Ellie scream. It took a moment for anyone to find Ellie because the sound of her scream seemed to echo down the 12th grade hall and into the gymnasium. Perkins had an assistant principal, who left school at the end of that year, finally realized she was screaming from behind the locked metal door that led down to the lower rooms beneath the 12th grade hallway. They fumbled around until they found the key. And when they opened the door, they saw Ellie lying at the bottom of the stairs in a screeching heap. Her right leg had been broken, which could be accounted for by a bad fall down the concrete steps, but what was stranger were that the bones in her hand, which had been crushed. They were damaged to such an extent that she could never use the left one well again, and the right one, the one she had thrown the dodgeball with, ultimately had to be amputated after several failed surgeries trying to restore blood flow. It wasn't lost on anyone that this had all happened right after she hurt Cassidy, and it didn't take long for everyone to realize that you and Thomas were in the class when it happened, and the three of us were standing in front of a couple of dozen witnesses at the time. Plus there was the fact that Ellie had somehow gotten past a locked door before she fell. But all of that was secondary to the biggest thing that made everyone at the school certain of what had caused Ellie's injuries. It was Ellie herself. While she never returned to school at Stonebrook, and we never heard of anyone talking to her about it later, close to 100 people had heard her screaming down the hall that dark day. They heard what she said before her cries of pain and terror had compressed into a wavering animal wail.
Oh God! Oh no! Fuck! It's got me! No! Get it off of me! My hands! No! Professor! No!
And now a brief pause for a word from our sponsors and a word of warning if you have children around. This is an R-rated promo, so go ahead and fast forward about a minute and a half. So just a heads up, R-rated promo, CD Universe, they sell nasty toys. Here we go. In 1996, over 20 years ago, a company by the name of CD Universe began selling music and movies on the internet. While they are a small company with only about a dozen employees, they are competing big time with the big box stores, shipping nationally and internationally. Now, it wasn't the plan, but a vendor accidentally shipped them a box of porn one time. CD Universe said, we're gonna run with this. These toys and adult novelties, well, they sold like crazy. You may be asking, what does CD Universe sell? They got bullets, vibrators, including rabbits, strokers, lubricants, bondage gear, dildos, cock rings, my personal favorite, anal toys, and everything else. And the bros of Brohio are here to tell you that you should give CD Universe a try. They have a huge selection of products from all the major adult toy brands, including Cal Exotics, Doc Johnson, Evolved, and Pipe Dream. Also, they've got boutique brands, condoms, and even lingerie. Shipping and billing are completely discreet. Everything will say CD Universe, which, they still do sell CDs, vinyl records, DVDs, Blu-rays, you name it, they got it. Their customer service department is award-winning and professional. CD Universe's website is safe and secure. And just think about it. There's no super awesome adult toys around where you live at. CD Universe can bring all of that to your doorstep with no judgment. Try whatever you want and get whatever you need. And as a listener of the Brohio podcast, we'd like to treat our listeners right, so you'll get 20% off of your first order by visiting cduniverse.com/Brohio. Guys, it's time to have some fun in the bedroom. Bullets, vibrators, strokers, lubricants, bondage gear, dildos, cock rings, anal toys, everything else. cduniverse.com/Brohio.
Stories and beliefs have power. So do names. When Ellie screamed out the professor's name in pain and terror, she cemented the idea of its existence in the minds of everyone that heard it. Even those who didn't want to believe, that called the stories of ghosts and dark rituals childish fairy tales, had a black sliver of doubt slid into their heart that day. And for those that already believed or wanted to, it was confirmation of something both wondrous and terrible. I remember us all talking about it one time a couple of years after Ellie was attacked, before the worst of it started happening. We were still comfortable and confident at that point, feeling special. And we talked about it more freely in those days, about what the professor might actually be and how it worked. About how the other people must have looked at it, and why they were all at least a little afraid of us. That's when Mills had spoken up. She said that if you took a town full of people, most any town, you'd have some people that believe in God, some that didn't, and some that fell in between. But if one day that town saw a miracle, something that seemed to clearly point out the existence of God, and beyond that, seemed to indicate that God liked some people better than the rest, it would be interpreted differently by different people. Some would ignore or try to explain away the miracle, even if there was no reasonable alternative available. Some would embrace it and find comfort in proof it provided. But some would just be scared, because what's more terrifying than the idea that God does exist, but he really doesn't like you very much? Now, I believe in God, and I think that whatever God is, it's a lot kinder and fairer than the professor. But after Ellie's fall, we weren't worried about the professor being kind and fair. We were focused on it being on our side. I'd like to think that we were somehow manipulated by it in the weeks and months and years that followed. Pushed to turn a blind eye to the true nature of the thing that led our group. But I think that's a lie. Having proof to match what our hearts already knew was a relief in many ways, and knowing that the professor would protect us went a long way towards easing our fears about what we might have played a hand in creating, or at least waking up. We felt chosen and special, and if it accorded us extra respect and difference from the other students, what's the harm? It reminded me of a story that my grandmother told me when growing up. There was a little boy who lived in the wilds of India with his family for most of his childhood. When he had turned 12, he got work as a servant for the prince. One day, the prince went out riding with two of his friends and took the boy along to act as his steward. They'd been riding for several hours when they came to a clearing. In the middle of the clearing was a massive tiger sunning itself in the tall grass. The prince and his friends began excitedly boasting to each other about what they could do, how they could fight the beast, even without a weapon. They were somewhat drunk at the time, but they were also feeding off of each other's foolishness and ego, so it wasn't long before one slipped from his horse to address the others. The first friend said,
"I will go into the grass and wrestle the tiger into submission."
With that, he stripped off his shirt and ran at the tiger, leaping onto its back. The animal roared in surprise and anger, and within a matter of seconds, it had torn the man apart. The prince and his other friend were horrified, but they were more determined than ever to dominate the tiger and avenge their friend. The boy tried warning them to stop, but the prince slapped him and told him to be silent. The second friend vowed,
I will go into the grass with my club and beat the tiger into submission or kill it if it will not submit.
With that, he hunkered down and began creeping through the tall grass towards the great cat as though to sneak up on it. When he was 10 feet from the tiger, it leapt on him and ripped out his throat. The prince was now beside himself with fear and anger. He roughly shoved the boy forward, intending on sending him to his death so no one would be alive to contradict the prince's grand tale of how he fought valiantly to save his friends from a giant tiger. The boy did as he was told and went out to the great beast. The tiger studied the boy carefully as he approached. His large, yellow eyes narrowed as he glanced between the small figure and the prince who stood back at the tree line. For his part, the prince already had one foot in the stirrup, ready to make a run for it if the tiger headed his way. He wanted to see the insolent boy killed, but not badly enough to risk himself. But the boy wasn't killed. Instead, the tiger licked his face with a giant pink tongue, and if the prince wasn't mistaken, he heard the beast begin to purr when the boy put his arm around the massive shaggy neck. The boy said something in low tones to the tiger before releasing his neck and returning to the prince.
How?
The prince demanded, all fear now forgotten in the face of his wounded pride and indignation.
How did you face the tiger and not get killed, boy?
When the boy said nothing, he pulled a musket from the stash at his waist, his jaw hard with anger.
No matter. If you can face it, so can I.
The prince let out a grunt as the small knife was shoved into his gut, and when he looked down, the boy twisted the knife and yanked it back out. Incredulous, he went to point the gun at the boy, but the tiger was on him now, removing the gun and the arm that raised it with a single swipe. As the prince lay dying, the boy and the tiger stood over him covered in his life's blood. The tiger absently licked the back of the little boy's head as he answered the prince. I grew up near these woods, Your Majesty. This tiger has been one of my best friends for years. He would never harm me or let me come to harm, nor I him. The prince, choking on blood, gasped out a response.
But why? Why not warn us before we tried to fight it?
The boy laughed, bending over to wipe his small knife off on the prince's fine brocade. Do you need the advice of a servant boy to tell you when not to fight a tiger? You thought there was fun to be had, and there was. It's just that it was for my friend the tiger, not for you. And why should I spoil his fun? He's a true and loyal friend, while you, I hardly know it all.
Damn, your grandmother told some fucked up stories,
Thomas said with a snort, getting a dirty look from Ellis. It was getting late now, and I was reaching my limit for what new and terrible things I could hear for the night, yet I found myself asking Ellis for more. What do you think the point of the story was, Ellis? Ellis smiled, his eyes tired. Telling all of this, dredging it up, was taking a toll on him too.
I've never been sure. I used to think it meant to be careful of who you fuck with because you don't know when you'll run across someone badder than you. Or maybe that people will do or accept just about anything for something or someone important to them, regardless of who might get hurt in the process. But now I think the message is that when you're best friends with the tiger, you start looking at other people as nothing more than prey. The summer after Ellie was fun and exciting time for us. We were scared, but only enough to make it more interesting. We'd come around to the idea that there was a tiger in town, but that it was our friend. We debated trying to communicate with the professor, but Mills and me were against it from the start. And with nothing new happening around us, at first we weren't even sure that the professor could leave the school grounds. But by late June, we had heard several stories of people having strange encounters in town. A man being chased by a shadowy figure while walking through General's Park late at night. A store downtown having all of its windows broken out with several employees inside with no signs of how it was done or why. These things, if they were related to the professor, had sinister connotations. In truth, Mills and I argued, even though it was arguably payback for hurting Cassidy, Ellie's accident was fairly brutal and extreme. Maybe the professor was friendly to us, and maybe it wasn't, but it's certainly dangerous either way. Then the car accident happened. Or almost happened. Do you remember that part, Alex? Okay, fuck. Well, one day you and your mom and you were going to the grocery store. You know that big intersection up from where you lived? A gas truck missed the light as you were crossing the intersection. It should have hit your car right where you were sitting in the passenger seat. The fucking thing was going better than 40 miles an hour and would have killed you. I'm sorry, Mills, but it's the truth. It would have killed him if it had hit. But it didn't hit. Less than 5 feet from the outside of your car door, the truck hit something else. We went and looked at the car the next week at the junkyard. It was crushed up to the window of the cab like it had ran into the side of a battleship. Hell, I don't know how it didn't explode, but it didn't. The driver died, but you were all fine. And, well, after that, we knew. The professor was our friend. We didn't talk about it with other people, but news of the wreck had spread through the town. There was even a picture in the newspaper. By the time we got back to school, our social standing had changed again. Some people avoided us like the plague, while others actually started trying to befriend us, to get in the circle. But, of course, the circle already had its 6th and final member. You were the one that called us that first, the Stonebrook 6. We laughed at the time, but it stuck. When it somehow got out into the rest of the school, we weren't worried or embarrassed. We wore the name as a badge of honor, a symbol of how special we were to have a tiger as a friend. But then...
Ellis stopped, looking around at the others and back at me.
I'm beat, man. I'm going to start messing up on some of the details, and I think you've heard more than enough for now. We can talk more about it later, okay?
I nodded my understanding, feeling a mixture of disappointment and relief. We all hung out quietly for a few more minutes before finding spots to sleep for the night. The next day, none of us discussed it, and I haven't talked about it further with anyone yet. But that needs to change. I'm about to stop writing for now and go call Mills. See if she knows about Ellis and how she's doing. I don't want to talk more about this with her over the phone, so I'm going to see about flying out to visit her the next couple of days, possibly after I've talked with my mother. Because I know my mom has to know some of this, or know something about something. There has to be a reason why she abandoned me with Aunt Judy at 15 and will barely talk to me even now. I trust what Ellis told me, what I might learn from the others, but I'm not taking anything for granted. And I just don't know. I feel like Ellis was hiding some things from me, even if it was for the best of intentions. I don't think my dear mother will be as worried about my feelings. Alright, so that ends those 2 parts for the story there. I do apologize, like I said, it's a little short, but I am going to do another one probably tomorrow. Today's Thursday, so tomorrow's Friday. Yep, that's typically how it goes. So, even though I can't do long episodes, I can still do multiple short ones, so I think that's what I'll do for now. So until next time.